So I'm so pleased to have Patricia here with us today. She is a journalist, author, and teacher, and a former New York Times reporter. She was a restaurant critic for over 25 years for the International Herald Tribune. And she has won numerous awards for her cookbooks. She is the three-time winner of the prestigious James Beard Award. And in addition to all the time she spends writing and publishing her books, she also runs a very popular cooking school in both Paris and Provence. And she currently lives in France and splits her time between those two places. So next time you're in France, you know what you got to do. And her husband Walter is also here with us today, who is the former executive editor of the International Herald Tribune. And her latest book, Salad as a Meal, which I think some of you are lucky enough to get a copy of, is really about how we can enjoy salad as a light, delicious way to be healthy, but still have a satisfying meal. And I am going to not say too much more words about the book and let Patricia do that herself. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Patricia.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's really great to be here. I love San Francisco and I love Google, so nice combo. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the path to how I got here today. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My mother was a great cook. The cookie jar was always full, and I always assumed that I would be surrounded by good food. I just took it for granted. And people always say, did you write first or eat first, or write about food first? And I said, well, I ate before I wrote, so I guess that came first. But I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a journalist, and so I followed the straight, narrow path of writing for my high school newspaper, majored in journalism. But back then, I'm 143 years old, so back then, we didn't have very many food mentors. I mean, Betty Crocker didn't make it. So it never occurred to me that I could make a career out of food. And so my real passion at that time, along with food, was art. And so I started to be an art critic. And my first job out of the University of Wisconsin was at the Washington Post, and I moved there the week of the Watergate break-in. So it was a nice 4 years to be working there. In fact, I moved to Washington the week of the Watergate break-in and left as they were publishing the final days. So I was through those whole times. And in fact, when they were filming All the President's Men, we got to take every reporter or journalist was allowed to take one object from their desk to be used on the set of All the President's Men. I don't think my cup made it, but it was sort of fun. And so while I was writing about art, I realized that it wasn't really my fit. I would go to the Smithsonian and review an exhibit on ancient African art, and there was nobody to talk to except, maybe the curator. And I realized I went into journalism to talk to people and so on. Although I still say that, is the chef here? No, okay, good. No, just kidding. I always say that artists and chefs are the worst interviews because everything they have to say is in their work. And so I started writing about crafts and then about food. And in 1976, I was offered a job to go to work at the New York Times. And I went to apply for my first day, and I had a little sheet of paper, which I wish I still had, and it said Walter Wells, 3rd floor, and the rest is history. So I met Walter and worked at New York for about 4 years, covering a lot of, this was 76 to 80, so this was before there was a real food revolution in America. There were farmers markets, but they were just starting to grow. And I had a lot of fun working on that. And then in 1979, Walter was offered a job to move to Paris and work as a managing editor of the International Herald Tribune. So we thought, well, that's cool. We'll do that for 2 years, and then we'll move back to New York. Well, 32 years later, we're still there. And I went to New York with the idea of writing a book called The Food Lover's Guide to Paris, because no one really at that time had a book there were restaurant guides, but I thought, well, what do these critics do between meals? I mean, you've got to go to bakeries and pastry shops and chocolate shops and tea salons and wine bars. And so I went around to all the editors in New York, and they all said, oh, Patricia, that's a lovely idea. We'd love to buy it as a consumer, but it'll never sell. But I always believed, and I still believe, that if I'm crazy off the wall passionate about something, there are enough of you out there who share my passion and you'll read my story or buy my book. So after about 2 years of actually writing the book, knowing that someday some editor would say yes, Peter Workman in New York said yes. And in 1984, the first book came out. And actually today I am looking for volunteers to help me do an Android version of the book for the phones. So I have my card here, and if there's anyone who would like to volunteer to do that horrible job and work with me on that, I'd be happy to have someone. I started working on this in about January. And in fact, if you go to my website and you want to see what's new and hot in Paris, there's a section on restaurants in Paris, and it lists all of the places I've been to in the last 3 or 4 months that I recommend. So one thing led to the other. After the Food Lover's Guide to Paris, being young and naive, I thought, well, of course I have to do the rest of the country. Not realizing it wasn't just a metro stop away. You know, I had to drive my Fiat Uno all over France and get stuck and dig myself out of ditches and so on and so forth, and deal with snow and rain. But that was probably one of the best times of my life, because it was just true research, and I would go from department to department, region to region in France, and got to really understand agriculture. That's what I guess I really learned, and to really feel a passion and commiserate with the farmers and see how difficult it was. And in fact, at the same time, we acquired our house in Provence, a farmhouse in the village of Vaison-la-Romaine, which is near Avignon. And there too, I realized that, you know, one day can wipe out your whole crop, and we have our own vineyard now, and I realized that in all of our jobs, we have thousands and thousands of days that we can prove ourselves. But as a winemaker, for instance, you only get one chance a year, and you could blow it. It could be blown in one storm. And so I realized that how difficult it is to no matter how good you are, you still have the elements to deal with. So after the France book, I was sitting in my office in Paris, and Peter Workman, my publisher, this was in the mid-'80s, and he had just come back from a terrible bistro lunch in New York City, and he said, Patricia, would you write us a bistro cookbook? And to this day, that's my best-selling book. It seemed to hit a chord everywhere, and it was published in about 8 or 9 languages. And it still is one that I still refer to. And sometimes I think I was pretty brave on some of the ingredients I used then, but it seems to work. And as I was working on that book, I had an assignment from a magazine called European Travel and Life, a beautiful magazine that unfortunately no longer exists. And the assignment was Romantic Inns of Tuscany. I know, feel sorry for me, feel sorry for me. And Walter wasn't so happy about that, because he said, well, usually I just have to show up, but on this assignment I have to show up and be romantic. So we were driving out of the Pisa airport, just starting the research on the book. And it was about 11 o'clock on a Friday in April. And he said to me, so where are we going to lunch? And I said, well, this isn't an eating story. It's about hotels. And so we drove on about 3 more minutes, and he said, so where are we going to lunch? And I said, well, there is this place in Lucca that Calvin Trillin wrote about. It sounds really good. So we stopped in Lucca. I didn't remember the name of it. We snuck into a shop and looked at the Michelin guide. Oh, that's the place. So we ended up having lunch there. And even though I still don't speak really any Italian, although with your hands you can get by with quite a bit. And I found myself in the kitchen taking notes on this wonderful dish that they did was the chicken under a brick, where they literally put it under 2 bricks and between bricks, and to smash it down and cook it. And as I was standing there taking notes, I thought, well, this is the next book. Son of Bistro has to be Trattoria. And that's my second best-selling book. So there's something going on there. And basically one thing led to the other, different books, books on Provence, books on Paris. Walter and I wrote our memoirs together. We'll always have Paris and Provence. And the book before Salad as a Meal was Vegetable Harvest. And as I was thinking about what to do next, it seemed to be, the way we do eat, I think most of us eat today, and I just saw in your cafeteria, you've got all sorts of salads that you can make as a meal. But I do warn you against the salad bar ethic, because sometimes we don't always have the radar of what really goes together so well. And what I try to really propose in Salad as a Meal is it's not just piling on the plate. You do have to think about what you're putting together. And kind of my rules are is every salad needs to have some crunch in it, whether it's a nut or a seed or firm vegetables like carrots or celery or green peppers or red peppers. It needs color. It needs something green. I always feel that if there's nothing green on the plate, it's missed, you know. In fact, I was in a really wonderful restaurant the other night in Chicago, and I realized, looking at it, and then the next day looking at the photographs of the food I took, it was all brown. Everything was brown. And I thought, gee, she's really good, but she doesn't get this color thing. So freshness, color, crunch, something green. And also, you need something, a dressing, usually the glue that holds the salad together. And you'll see if you look at the book, I have a lot of dressings, not just vinaigrettes, although I love vinaigrettes, but dressings that are really light and simple and flavorful and healthy. So yogurt and lemon juice are fabulous together, light cream and lemon juice and a little bit of chives. I have a tahini lemon dressing where you just take a little sesame paste tahini, mix that with some lemon juice, and you've got a very smoky flavor which you can use for chicken salads or turkey salads. And a salad as a meal doesn't have to necessarily contain soft greens. In fact, today I'm going to demonstrate one of those salads. And you'll see there's just a million variations on every single salad you can do. But in the book, I also feel sometimes you want some side dish to go with your salad. So I have soups, very simple, a lot of chilled soups, a pea soup with buttermilk, a zucchini soup with fresh ginger, an heirloom tomato soup, which is I drink for breakfast every day in the summertime. And also breads, because I am a big bread lover and I love making bread. So we have some flat breads, pita breads, pizza bases, and my homemade sourdough bread with a starter, recipe for the starter. And one of my favorites, which is a ham and cheese bread, a quick bread, which is really fast and easy to make. And I think that you'll see that almost everything in there is very quick and easy and doable, no matter how many hours a day you work. So I think what I'll do is maybe take questions now, and then we'll take like a 2-minute break, and then I'll do the demonstration, and then we can sign books after that. Does that work for everybody? Yes. Absolutely. Yes, sir. Already decided.
So in addition to being an author, you're also a teacher. Can you sort of talk about how you got into teaching and the idea to start your own?
Yes. The question was, as well as being an author, I'm a cooking school teacher, and I run my own cooking school both in Paris and Provence. And we started our first class in Provence in 1996, and we do about 10 weeks a year in Provence and 3 weeks a year in Paris. They're all week-long classes, and I hope I'll see some of you there next year. In your books, you have the class dates, the whole schedule, and you can go online and take a look at photos and comments on previous weeks that we've done. I guess we really started when I would be sitting around with friends at the dinner table, and they'd say, Patricia, tell us about sea salt. And I'd do my sea salt lecture, and then they'd say, Patricia, tell us about olive oil. And I'd give my little olive oil lecture, and I thought, maybe I can make something of this. And in 96, we started our first weeks, and I didn't know if I'd like it. I didn't know if anybody would come. And it just took off, and we have had so much fun doing it. It's, you know, they always say when you teach, the teacher is the one who learns the most, and it's true. And it's the perfect, for my career, it's the perfect balance of mixing the recipes and, you know, basically forming the recipes and the menus, which I think is so important, because I think most people don't think in terms of menus, and I think it's very important, again, like composing the salad, you need to compose the menu so it has balance of color and textures and so on, and weight, so that you don't get up from the table wobbling around. So we started that, and it's been very successful. And then a few years later, I bought a studio apartment in Paris just to use for the classes. So we have week-long classes, and during the week, it's all hands-on, and lots of varied recipes. We probably do 60 or 70 recipes within a week, almost an entire cookbook. And in Provence, we have a bread oven, a wood-burning bread oven, so we use that for a lot of our recipes and meals, and a lot of outdoors. And you'll see in the book all the pictures were taken at our house in Provence. We have a wonderful vegetable garden with 40 different varieties of heirloom tomatoes and lots of herbs and lots of fruits and so on. So we use as much as we can from both from our garden and from our village. And during the week in Provence, we cook, we visit vineyards, we go to restaurants, we do tastings of olive oils, and have a great time. And in Paris, it's similar. We do some wine tastings, visit bakeries, watch wood oven bread being prepared at Poilin Bakery, and go to top restaurants and markets for both of them, of course, as well. Does that answer your question? Great. Yes?
I have two questions. The first one is, what is your favorite food? And the second one is, did you like the movie Julie and Julia?
The question is, what's my favorite food? And the second question is, did I like the movie Julie and Julia? My favorite foods are like the A vegetables, artichokes, asparagus, avocados. I love raw fish. I had some of your sushi today. I love raw vegetables, and I do lots of what's now being known as crudo, lots of raw fish. And I love breads. I love making breads. And yes, I did like the movie. I wish Julie and Julia had been a little more about Julia alone. Sorry. And I wish they had done more than just Paris, because I visited her often in Provence. In fact, she visited us quite a bit. And I had the great fortune of having Julia Child's stove that she used, not the one that's in the Smithsonian. I didn't steal it from there in the middle of the night. But she used to come down visit us on her way to visiting her own house in Provence near Grasse. And when she was going down to close up the house, and she knew she wouldn't be back, decided she wouldn't be going back to France again. And so I thought, Jesus, having Julia Child's stove is like having Freud's couch, you know? So I asked her, I said, Julia, could I buy your stove? And she said no. And I thought, okay, fine. I didn't know what I was going to do with it or where I was going to put it. And but then she got up the next morning and said, I changed my mind. You can have my stove if you replace it with a new one. I guess that's real hard to decide. So we did go down and bring in a new stove and took her stove. And it's very sweet, because last year I called La Cornue and I said, you know, I have this famous stove, and because it's from the 60s. And I think she never had it serviced or anything. In fact, she always talked about, what about service après-vente? Which means, you know, after repair. And it was, you know, the oven was getting a little wonky. So I said, do you have a specialist who works on the old stoves? And he said, we absolutely do. And the man called me and he said in French, I'm going to restore that stove to its youthful vigor. I thought, gee, I wish I could have a pill for that too. And he came and he spent a whole afternoon and fixing it and replacing little parts. And now it runs like a top. It's perfect. And my students, of course, love getting to cook on it, bake with it, and take their picture as well. So, yes?
When you're writing a recipe, how many times do you have to reconfigure it?
The question is, when you're writing a recipe or working on a recipe, how many times do I test it? It really depends. Obviously, if it's a good recipe, it'll get tested a lot, especially with my students. I will test a recipe at least 1, 2, 3 times by myself. And sometimes they never get tested again. They just get put in the reject file if I'm not excited. You know, if it's not quite what I wanted, I don't belabor a recipe anymore, because there's so many good things out there. If it doesn't go the first, second, or third time, it just doesn't make it. But then once I've got the 1, 2, 3 times that I like, then it goes into the cooking school. And of course, this cooking school is the greatest way to watch the students test a recipe, not only see how they work with it, what they create with it, how easy it is to follow, are there mistakes in the recipe, and then whether or not the students like it. In fact, on the last bite of the day, on Friday of the last meal we have together, everybody gets a vote on the best taste of the week. And that really helps me understand what people like. And in fact, it's interesting from this book, and I was surprised, because when you do a book, not all recipes are are the same best friends. You know, some of them you think, well, this is nice, but this one's better. And the one recipe that I didn't expect to be a big hit is a poached turkey breast. And it was named best taste of the week all 3 weeks of this spring in Paris. And it's a very simple recipe, a perfect picnic recipe or something to have in your refrigerator if you're looking for some lean protein. It's a whole turkey breast that's poached in a broth, and then you make a vinaigrette of lemon juice, olive oil, lemon zest, capers, cornichons, and you let it marinate in the refrigerator for 24 hours, and then you just slice it very thin with a little bit of that dressing over it. And it's quite wonderful. And I'm working on variations of doing an Asian variation, even a Mexican variation. So you could use lots of different herbs and accompaniments for that. Yes?
I'm curious about what sort of changes in French food culture are occurring. The only one I've read about is the embracing of the hamburger. But I'm sure there's others, and feel free to be opinionated about them.
Oh, sure. The question is the changing scene in France with food. Well, it's interesting because in working on this app, I've really been visiting, 2, 3, 4, 5 new restaurants every week. And in terms of the dining scene, I've never seen so much excitement since the early 1980s when I started reviewing restaurants. At that time, to become known, you had to work for a Michelin star. You had to have, fancy restaurant. You had to get your first star, your second star, your third star. And all of that cost a lot of effort and money and so on. But today, I think the young chefs are kind of just saying, I don't need that. I can. And what they're doing, though, is they're opening in out-of-the-way neighborhoods, tiny spots with 20 or 30 seats. A lot of them have only one menu. You get what you get, And this has become the theme, and it's really quite wonderful. I'd say one of the biggest influence I see in each of the menus is a lot of Asian influence. We're on a yuzu craze right now. You cannot go into a restaurant that doesn't have a yuzu souffle or yuzu zest. Yuzu is a Japanese, if you don't know, it's a Japanese citrus that's really flavorful, very fragrant. And you can now buy yuzu juice and yuzu zest and candied yuzu zest, and I make my own yuzu salt. Oh, and there's also yuzu butter. So, and I like it. The hamburger, I'm not a hamburger girl, so I can't tell you. Yes, I know it is a trend. And, that's fine. But I don't have to worship at that altar. I'd say, there is definitely, in the last 32 years we've been there, you'd certain more and more fast food. Domino's Pizza does exist. There's a Subway now in Paris. But again, we can't fight City Hall, and that's going to be there. But that said, let me just say one other thing is that the markets have never been stronger. People always ask about the organic movement, which has always been strong in France, not as vocal, because a lot of people just have always naturally farmed organically, so they didn't need to scream about it, especially in winemaking. But I've never had so much choice in the market. Things have never cost more money. But I feel blessed, both in Paris and Provence, with all the ingredients I can get, especially, all the fruits and vegetables, the meats, poultry, cheese, fish. It's very exciting. Yes?
You mentioned the decline of chasing Michelin stars, which I know is much based around service.
As much, I'm sorry?
There's a lot of service standards in the Michelin ratings. And as I think restaurants get focused more on just creative food quality, where do we go for a consistent restaurant rating as far as experience of food?
Okay, the question is, if Michelin is being put aside, where do we go for really good, consistent service? Because is that what you're...
Because food is taking the lead as opposed to service.
Food is taking the lead as opposed to service, but I think we have levels of what we expect of service. If you're just in a 20-euro lunch place and you're getting great food, and in these places the service is fine. You may have a bare wooden table and you may be eating with stainless steel, but that doesn't diminish the pleasure of the meal. But yes, and I do believe that I still go to the 3-star restaurants. I love them, and I love having great service and having a wonderful wine list and so on. I'm not diminishing them at all. I mean, I think, and the Gisavois and the Robuchons and the Ostrances, and they should, I'm glad they're still there, because I don't want my bistro lunch or dinner every day. So, but the fact that they can live side by side, I think is great. And I think it's a healthy mix right now. Yes?
I was wondering where you get most of your recipes. Like, do you make them all up yourself or find inspiration?
Where do I get my recipes? I would say probably 1/3 make up out of my head, 1/3 from going to markets and seeing combinations, and maybe 1/3 restaurants. I've always, whenever I go to a restaurant and I see something I really like, I'll ask for the recipe. And 99% of the time, the chefs will give you the recipe. Yes?
What's your favorite restaurant in San Francisco?
My favorite restaurant in San Francisco, well, we had a fabulous meal at Boulevard the other night, and I just love it. I think Nancy Oaks is just right on. I mean, there was not one bite that wasn't really wonderful. And I think it's amazing that it's a big place, but they really managed to just, with a kind of ballet-like quality of service. And you see, I thought one of the cutest things is we were there on Saturday night, and there were so many couples sitting there holding hands. And I haven't seen that in a restaurant in ages. And it sort of says, okay, this is a destination where, you know, he's proposing, or I don't know. It was just sweet, because I don't think I see that. I certainly don't see that in Europe, of people sitting there holding hands and looking in their eyes. Yes?
As someone who's not too handy in the kitchen, I'm wondering what are some of the biggest mistakes you see from novice cooks?
Question is, as someone who's not too handy in the kitchen, she says, she asked, what are the most common mistakes I see from novices? One, not understanding knife skills. And knife skills are not that hard. You just need 3 good sharp knives. But I once had a student who said that she did all of her cooking, and she had for decades with her 6 steak knives she got from Sunoco gas station. And they used to, do you remember when they used to give things away? Okay, you're probably too young to know that. But do invest in a couple of good knives and keep them sharp. That's pretty important. The other thing I see, one of the things that I insist upon in my school is that we do a mise en place, which means you take all of your ingredients, you pre-measure them before you do anything else. You've got your tray full of all your ingredients. And there are many reasons for that. And one thing I always tell students is, if you get nervous or flustered in the kitchen, it's usually because your kitchen is a pig pen. And you can't, it's just like your desk, although I shouldn't say, it's harder to work. It's easier to work at a neat desk than a messy desk. It's easier to cook in a neat kitchen than in a messy kitchen. The other thing I see is people generally take either a bowl or a pan or a skillet that's too small for the job. I don't know why. Maybe people are thinking they're trying to economize. But, you've got this huge mass of stuff, and you're trying to work it into this tiny little bowl. So just think about that. But going back to the mise en place idea is that it's not just to keep things neat, but also, for instance, if you're doing your mise en place and you need 4 eggs and you've only got 3, you need to go to the store and get some more. Or it's also a good way, if you're using up the last of anything, that you can start your shopping list for ingredients that you need. And it's just a better way to operate in the kitchen. Yes?
I was wondering if technology plays any role in the food culture in France, because I know here in the Bay Area and other large metropolitan cities in the U.S., there's like half a dozen websites people can rate restaurants on, or like pull up an app on their phone and look, everyone's.
So you're asking really technology in terms of restaurants, and not in terms of cooking?
Correct.
Oh, well, technology plays a huge role. I mean, for instance, years ago on a book tour, I would spend half my time in newspaper offices. Well, there are no newspapers anymore, so I think it's a good and bad, because I think that not everybody's an equally good critic. And the same thing with recipes. Sure, you can get any recipe free online, but does it work, and is it reliable? And that's the same way I feel about everyone being a critic. But again, got to live with it. So certainly it has, and it makes everyone's life easier. I mean, I remember, before we had all of this, that I'd have to call the restaurant to get a copy of the menu, or find out when they were open. I mean, now I can get it online, and it makes things much easier. So we have much more information, obviously, at our fingertips. Yes?
What was the transition like between moving from a journalist to an author, and like as a book?
The question of moving from a journalist to an author, really no transition. I mean, you write one writes the way one writes. In fact, when I wrote for the French press, I thought, how am I going to do this? And really, I don't, you do what you do, and you do it in your style and in your way. But I think that being a journalist and being an author, it works hand in hand also, because it's basically research and getting your facts right and trying to convey information. Any more questions over? Yes?
I know you mentioned the poached turkey. I was wondering if you have any other favorite recipes.
Well, the one we're doing today, which is a zucchini carpaccio with pistachio oil, pistachios, a little lemon juice and lemon zest and lemon salt, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. I mentioned the ham and cheese bread, which I love. I love all of the raw fish and shellfish dishes. There's a great lobster salad, which I could have every day if I could afford it. And the soups, the cold soups, I really love. I just live on those all summer long. Yes?
If you could have anything for your last meal.
Oh, please no. If I could have anything for my last meal. Well, it's cute because I have a Google alert for all of my books, and the salad as a meal came up the other day, and it mentioned that someone on death row and what his last request was, and it was for a tuna salad. I don't know how that got into the salad as a Google alert. I decided not to tweet about that one. Oh, I don't know. It would be sitting down with my husband and friends, cooking something together with a great wine. Oh, I don't want to think about that. That's not a fair question. Okay, shall we do a little cooking? Okay, so what we're going to do today is zucchini carpaccio with pistachios, pistachio oil, lemon salt, and a little bit of fresh thyme. And a couple little technique stories here. One, I never ever have a lemon and then throw it away. The zest is one of the greatest parts of the lemon. So I always zest the lemon. What we're doing here is we're making lemon salt, which is something you can make every day or keep it in your refrigerator for up to a week. You can do this with any zest, with grapefruit, with lemons, limes. And it's one way to add really color and fragrance and zest to your food. But also, if you're concerned about cutting down on salt, you're using much less salt than you would normally. So you can either use a microplane or you can use the traditional zester. And so I'm just going to zest this right into the mixture of salt. And what you can also do is zest it and let it dry for a few minutes. And if you use a larger, coarser zest, you can put that in a food mill and just make a real fine salt out of that. And I've been doing this for years, and it's just a great way to add lots. Can you smell that? How wonderful it is! These incredible Meyer lemons. It smells good too.
Local Meyer.
Is it sea salt?
Yes, yes. It's a fleur de sel, the finest salt. I don't need my purse with me here. Why am I doing that? I look like the bag lady or something. And so what we're going to do is it's worth investing in these $29.99 little mandolins. And this is a funny story, actually. When I do this, I always tell people, when I'm using a mandolin, I repeat after myself, I'm slicing, I'm slicing, I'm slicing, to concentrate so that I don't. Well, my editor sent me an email yesterday, and she said, I was using your I'm slicing technique, and I cut myself. I'm slicing, I'm slicing, I'm slicing. This is a beautiful mandolin because it's good, you can adjust it. And so with this, what we're going to do is just layer the zucchini. And in the winter, I do this same recipe with broccoli, just steamed and refreshed broccoli. And you can do the broccoli in a mound and then put the avocados around. And if you wanted to add a protein element to this, you could add some shrimp that you might toss in the dressing. And what we've done here is we've added the dressing about 10 or 15 minutes before we want to serve it, or even longer if you like, so that the dressing soaks into the zucchini. And again, this has the crunch, the green, the freshness, the healthy qualities of a good salad. Oops. And the chef here had a brilliant idea. He gave me a little lesson in something. He couldn't find any pistachio oil today, so he made his own pistachio oil. He toasted pistachios and then poured them, mixed them with, strained it out and strained the hot oil over it, hot olive oil. And if you want to come up later and smell this or taste it, it's absolutely fabulous. So I would think that you could do the same thing with walnuts, hazelnuts, almonds, to make your own oils. So what we've done here, let's see, I'll mix up some. We're going to use a 4-to-1 mix of the lemon juice. You can use any kind of juicer you want on this. Can you smell that? It's really fabulous. Oops, don't spill. So what you can do is you can mix this up in a little container. And anytime you're using a nut oil, or even a homemade nut oil or purchased nut oil, that should always be refrigerated because they're much more, they have a much shorter shelf life than an olive oil would. Let's see. Oh, that's already made, so we're going to mix. So we're going to do 4-to-1 of the juice. And this is a perfect salad for my agent, who she once said, "Oh, I made your chicken salad." And I said, "You don't cook." And she says, "I do, but I don't do heat." So this is a no-heat salad. So if you were making this, and you could plate these individually too. I have some beautiful green square plates in Provence, and I put them on the square plates. They're really lovely that way. So we're just going to pre-dress this a little bit.
Was the dressing just the nut oil and the lemon?
Yes, and we're going to add a little bit of this salt to it as well. And then Walter's kindly doing all the avocados and the pistachios and the...
That's so you'll see I'm more than just a mascot. More than just Nancy Reagan sitting. Approvingly.
Okay. Would you like to try it? All right, here we go. Help yourself.